thanks so much for coming into our little ride around Detroit with the car. We will try to avoid successfully for the 87th time going to Canada because the road really wants me to go there, and but I'm avoiding it so far. So that's been cool. So what I wanted to talk, well, so we were just talking about, how much you drive, or, do you have to drive around a lot? Did you have kids who played soccer?
So I have 3 kids, and they were involved with lots of different sports and problem-solving groups and robotics and things. So definite road warrior, definite. Used to be minivan mom, and then it was SUV mom. Yeah. But they're all grown and flown now. So I'm just enjoying road trips.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we actually kind of tricked out the minivan with like a big like battery and everything, so that because we'd have to go to like all day for like a soccer game or something, and I'd just go there and work all day, from the back of the minivan, which is
so much downtime in between the kid activities that you certainly can.
Right. It was entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so why don't we talk about kind of why we're here, which is so you've been working with your team to kind of integrate Kubernetes more as an option. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why are you doing that?
Yeah. So I'm responsible for the team at Ford that is really all about developer tools and relations with them. Mm-hmm. So we manage the tools that our devs use, like GitHub and Jenkins and et cetera, big 14 different tool tech stack for myself.
Yeah. Always the way.
Exactly. But I also have teams who curate different platform products, ecosystems, to help accelerate our developers at the broader company, be able to deliver software much more quickly. So one such team is our CAS team, Container as a Service team, and they really have been doing a lot over the last few years in identifying, how to stitch together the various tools and how to educate our developers as we onboard them and as they kind of grow in their maturity, to use all of the benefits, that containers bring to the company.
So do they actually work with the individual development teams about kind of bringing up an application over, or are they more like providing a framework and a set of tools so that they're more self-directed teams?
So it's both actually.
Yeah.
So they build the platforms, right? But then they're also definitely tapped on the shoulder when there's specific needs. And we do individual consulting with product teams as needed.
Right.
So we try to extract ourselves from that part at a certain point once we feel like their training wheels are on securely.
Well, you should definitely talk to or take a look at Acorn, who I just interviewed, because what their mission is to try to make Kubernetes like more developer friendly, and so they kind of have a format which kind of feels more like Docker Compose, but is actually Kubernetes, so that it's a little bit more straightforward.
Oh, that's awesome! I'll definitely check them out.
Yeah. And so what you said? You had some other teams as well.
Yeah. So we have other platform teams that help curate web and mobile apps.
Right.
So we have those platforms that we stand up and manage. We have responsibilities to help the organization for quality testing and for load and performance testing. Various teams to just really help the community. One of the things I'm excited about, and I just attended the Backstage session, is we're using Backstage to do exactly what that whole talk was at KubeCon here.
Oh, that's always cool.
Right, which is to create a place where devs can go and they can see what's available. All of the tech docs are right there, and we're getting ready to ramp that up and roll it out for all of our products and consolidate. Like if you can think of all of the different places.
Yeah. How many versions of Python do we need to be running in production? Yes.
Exactly. So that's going to be a huge step forward in my team's ability to focus on less, which will really be more impactful.
Right. Yeah, when I was in consulting, one of the we kind of had 2 big offerings that we did, but one of them was platform portfolio reviews, and so we'd go to big companies like Pfizer, like in a division, right, and try to do exactly what you're describing, and we had the advantage of being a third party, right, so we kind of had outsider looking in, but the disadvantage of not knowing where all the secret scary stuff was, underneath desks and things. times that we're actually running production applications. Yeah, that's a big hurdle.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. In fact, I'm in the middle of an audit right now, and I control Jenkins, the people who decide to use what my offering is, but anybody can do whatever the heck they want.
Right.
And I don't have any control of that.
Right.
Like, I don't have any ability to influence that.
And
they will. Yeah. And I don't want to stop that, right? But I do want to educate them. So we're going to be deploying like training and all these different things to help mitigate that risk. Which is daunting because, I had planned to target one community and now I'm realizing,
it's all of them. Yeah.
I have to actually target the whole enterprise.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I mean, you were saying particularly you're concerned about security and not so much the security itself as much as making sure that developers are aware of security and the security risks that are kind of new and different about doing something in kind of Kubernetes. What's been your experience there?
Yeah. So I've been really focused mostly, so I got this role in January, and my main focus has been education and onboarding and things that are available in the marketplace that help us do that are very convenient. The community that you yourself help curate is very helpful for that, right? But what I'm realizing is that learning curve is pretty steep. And one of the keynotes this morning was talking about how just kind of over in the last year, the implication, the security vulnerabilities that have been identified on Kubernetes instances has been skyrocketing, exponential growth.
But when you have a whole bunch of people start using it, that tends to be what happens.
Exactly.
Right.
So how do I now help also change the focus of our education to include that deepening their appreciation and understanding of security vulnerabilities so that they can, develop more securely, so they can know how to mitigate risks when they come up.
Right.
And then how can I help build visibility into where those vulnerabilities are for the company so I can help burn them down, right? So I can help improve
identify
overall.
them and making sure that they, it's one of those things that, it's developers, it's such a weird little world in the sense that, people compare it to engineering, but in a lot of ways, I also generally refer to it as it's much more like writing a book, and because you rewrite until it's good. And so what that means though is that developers have an inordinate amount of impact on what kind of literally gets built, but also like figuratively gets built. And so the more you can tell an engineer about like what they're trying to accomplish, the better decisions they make down in the details, right? And I think one of the things that we've definitely had as a gap for a long time, and it's finally starting to get better, is that one of those things should also be security, in that you need to properly understand security as just a regular engineer, because all those little tiny decisions you make actually often have a pretty strong security impact. And it's definitely changing. We're doing a lot more secure by default kind of deployments and things like that. So I think it's getting better, but I can definitely appreciate that that's a big task.
Well, and a lot of the tools are coming along that we can utilize to scan code and to identify where those are and to bring that visibility so we know what to tackle. But I think it's like a cultural change impact also that you have to impart that one of our priorities is security, so that it can that can be part of our DNA, and it's not something that's kind of after the fact corrected, for example. Right.
It's funny. Like I always joke about myself that I'm a true developer, so I don't care about security. I don't care about uptime, any of that stuff. But in fact, because I teach it and I've done a lot of production stuff, and in fact, it is really important to testing is ridiculously important. Security is ridiculously important, because the impact, especially when you're doing certain kinds of software, the impact can be very actually someone's life, right? If you screw up the wrong piece of software, it's like you've got a much bigger burden on what you're doing, I think, than a lot of engineers realize when they're typing some Python code. And it's got a lot of impact, and nobody wants to be the front page of a newspaper.
Exactly. And the reality is what we build, and the fact that a lot of our things are for customers to use, protecting the sanctity of that relationship with our customers is super important. And trying to treat them like family, and how you would make sure that you're taking that care and that focus.
Right. Yeah. I mean, coming from Red Hat, right? Like, you know, one of the major strengths of all of our products, right, is the fact that people trust Red Hat. You know, and so the last thing you want to do is break any part of that. And it can be really difficult because, you know, when you're, you know, at least for me, right, when you're down deep, you know, building something, it can be difficult to remember the why almost, because you're like, you just want to build it, you know, you just want to get it done because it's cool. But yeah, it's super hard. So do you want to talk a little bit about KBE? Like what, you know, what's your experience been with Cube by Example?
Yeah, so we have, you know, been using and moving toward our cloud native vision for many years before KBE was kind of a thing. And we've used various training sources to kind of upskill. What I love most about KBE now is it's something that is community kind of curated, relevant examples, and now we can use it to point our team to instead of kind of creating our own materials,
your own version,
or looking for whatever software training that we've licensed, right, and kind of going through and saying what's a relevant example. It's a much easier place to go and find sources to say, here, go read this, right, here's some examples. And it's really simplified our ability to make that meaningful impact in a quick way. So I will say our adoption continues to grow, and we've appreciated that, and it saves us from being technical writers and deployers of education, right?
Well, and I mean, you know, the reason, you know, communities are good, right, is like, you know, I keep talking about this in these interviews, right, is that you also get lots of different perspectives, right? So, you know, you're not, you know, there is a Ford mindset, right? Like, you know, there is, right? So having, you know, something that's out in public makes it so that you can, you know, whether the Ford mindset is a good one or a bad one, it's kind of doesn't matter. There's always different perspectives. So the more people you can kind of involve in a conversation about how you're approaching problems and things like that, the better a job you can usually do. You know, so I'm a big fan of, you know, kind of community delivered stuff. I think one of the things that I wonder if you experience is like, in my life, as you know, I'll get students who will say, you know, hey, can you give me a list of sources for learning about this thing, right? And you know, do you find that having that, you know, Cube by Example, right, makes it a lot easier to say, oh yeah, here it is.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. That's exactly how we use it, almost like a reference, right? A way to say, oh, here, you want to learn more, here, go here, look at this, and point to the specifics. And it's interesting that at Ford, the people who are most kind of community-minded, I know, we have geese everywhere in Michigan. They're very fun.
It is fun.
They're very messy, though.
Yeah.
But the people who have been attracted to work in a team like mine, right, where we're enabling the organization, are the ones who care deeply about contributing to their greater community, and about helping them, about sharing their knowledge and experience with others that can really impact the whole of the company. So it's really an honor to work with that community. You know, it has been an honor this year, and I continue to look for ways that I can help them make their voices heard even more and be more impactful. So it's been terrific.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. It's like one of the things that's very difficult to do is, like, especially for somebody who is kind of known as an enabler of, you know, new technology or whatever, is shifting from that one-to-one relationship that you often have to, you know, 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 1,000,000, because the way you have to deliver the content is quite different. And you know, and until you get some experience with doing it, it's really, really hard. And you know, and making those things accessible, you know, especially when you talk about, you know, rolling out tooling, making that accessible to people who've never been presented it before. Again, it's like you and whoever else, you know, help build it, you have your own mindset. So you have this preconceived notion of how things work, and so when you look at it, it's all very intuitive, but then somebody else looks at it and they're like, why does this work this way? And then you're like, oh yeah, you're coming in from a different view. So it's really quite difficult.
Yeah, that's been interesting. When some of our people, if they're having difficulties, they'll come to our team and ask specific questions like, how do I do this one thing? And I encourage my team to ask bigger questions, like expand it. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Don't assume that if you educate them on answering that one question, it's going to solve their problem, because it's unlikely to.
Right.
This is just the next thing they're investigating, and it might not actually solve the bigger problem.
Right.
So I always encourage them to ask bigger questions. What are you really trying to solve? How can I help you with that? Instead of just kind of responding with, here's how you do it.
Yeah, one of the big things I've found kind of in my career is like when somebody asks a question, you really want to think about where did they get this question from, and try to extrapolate from that, and then what do you know about what they're trying to do, or ask, right? And make sure they're kind of aligned. Doing dev advocacy, that was a big part of it. Is like, have you thought about maybe not fixing that bug and try this other thing over here? Because that might work a lot better for you once you understand what the problem they're trying to solve is.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's also, I think it's also particularly kind of goes against the typical software developer's mindset.
Right.
My default is like, I want to just answer.
Yeah.
Because I want to get back to whatever I was doing.
Exactly, because they're always that kind of context switching and distractions.
Right.
My team is they monitor many different channels because we want to meet our developers where they're at. But as a result, if they're also trying to do heads down work and creating the next platform, it's a distraction, right? So, so the normal response is a quick answer, but I encourage them to kind of take that deep breath and say, "Oh, why would someone ask me this question?" Right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember, and I don't know how accurately I'm remembering the story, but supposedly Microsoft put out a management book for managing software engineers in the 80s and 90s, and one of their guidelines was that every engineer should have a door. Because every time somebody asked them a question, there was a 15 minutes that it took them to get back to wherever they were. And that if there was a door there, it could be a door that was you're fully free to come in or whatever, but just that physical barrier would make the person who was going to ask the question think a little bit longer about it and sometimes solve their own problem rather than pulling the person out. And it's always kind of struck with me as kind of a really interesting, it's totally true, but at the same time, you've got to find a way that you can make the people available. This is why it really annoys me when nobody uses office hours. It's like, this is the best way I can give you this and still do my stuff. But the problem is the office hours are rarely lined up for when exactly I have a problem.
Right. You want your question answered in the real moment that it's happening, and not necessarily wait for when it's right for the experts.
Right.
But there's ways, I encourage my mentees and my team to consider, you are in charge of your schedule. And if you need heads down work, block yourself as unavailable out of office.
Right.
Turn your notification on your instant messaging to do not disturb. Right. Don't answer. Shut your Outlook down. Shut your IMs down. Right. So that you can do that. Heck, even unplug from the Ford network. Right? Right. Focus, whatever you need to do to focus.
Yeah.
And make it known, through whatever kind of notification that you have at your fingertips, to say, I'm working on this. I'll be available at 12 or 12:30 or whatever whenever you're kind of coming up for air. And that sometimes works, but usually what that does is it says, oh, he's not available, let me go to this person. And they end up asking the same question around to 10 different people, and now you've distracted 10 people.
Because the expert didn't have the answer. Oh, yeah, that's true.
And that's kind of a time suck also. It's like, how can we combat that? It's been interesting since we were all virtual.
Well, one of the things that I've kind of really missed about, there's a lot of old school internet people, right? And there were a lot of social norms that were really important. And it's really funny. I'd never heard this until a couple of years ago, but they call it now Endless September, because it used to be in the early days of the internet, every September you got a whole brand new set of users of the internet because they went to college, and so you could train them in all the social norms. And I even remember doing this emailed training thing that somebody had built, and I just kind of signed up for it, and I learned about how to use the internet, right? Yeah. But one of the things that was huge about IRC, right, the Internet Relay Chat, is that you could could put whatever you wanted out there as like a question or whatever, and there was no expectation that the person on the other end would immediately respond.
Right.
And what's changed, I think, because of like text messaging primarily, is now we have this expectation in things like Slack or all these other tools that if you're there, you will instantly respond.
Right.
And it's really unfortunate, I think, that we've lost a lot of these original kind of norms. One of my other ones is email. You always used to reply below the original one.
Right.
And the reason was, and I never knew this actually until I went to Red Hat, was because that way, if you're just getting to the thread, you can read it in order.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of having to like try to figure out how to read it up.
Yeah, I always go to the bottom of the message and then read up.
Right. But if you actually reply on the bottom of the message, and it's one of the things that really annoys me about Outlook on the web. You can't even do it.
Right.
I was like, I can't do an inline response at all.
Yeah.
We've kind of. It's funny. I just think it's kind of funny that we're kind of coming somewhat full circle on a bunch of stuff that we knew a long time ago, but have kind of faded out of, the culture essentially.
Absolutely, I think that's so true, and it's funny because people who are younger than me don't remember, but I remember when I first started at Ford, the secretaries would print the executives' emails.
Oh yeah.
Because they didn't know how to check their email and respond.
Right.
And then they would dictate what the response was, and then the secretary would go in and respond to the email. And I just remember thinking, because I had used email in college, right? I was the early days of the internet.
Right. Hey,
But
my school was on BitNet, so tell me about it.
That was so interesting to see that divide, but it's right. It's kind of like it used to be memos, and then it was emails, and now it's instant messages, and now with the notifications that you expect likes and smiles, and that kind of adrenaline, or what is it?
Yeah, I know what you mean. The
serotonin bump, right? That you're constantly watching these channels to see, did I get a response? Am I getting that kind of boost? And it's flipped. It's flipped kind of what we hold as important, and really what it's doing is creating way more distraction, way more inefficiency in actually getting solid work done. So that'll be kind of the next thing of how do we
find the balance.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
it's like everything else, right? We get all these pendulum swings, back and forth, and periodically, like eventually it comes a little bit back. It's one of the things I've seen so many times now in my technical career of just various technologies swinging all the way to one side and then all the way back to the other. I totally agree with you. What I suspect is, right, there's some happy medium in there that we haven't discovered yet. But I'm not necessarily saying we should go back to the old way. Just that there were definitely some advantages. So how are you enjoying KubeCon?
It's been pretty good so far. I got here for the keynotes this morning, and I attended 2 sessions so far, and I'm getting value out of those. So this is my first KubeCon event.
Cool.
I'm so excited that Detroit is hosting it. I don't think that the tech world understands what a big technology base we have in Michigan, and the kind of evolution of the auto manufacturers being based here with all of that kind of foundational core engineering and manufacturing is like turning all into tech skills now. So to be able to showcase my beloved Detroit with the tech conference and invite people from all over the world to it is exciting. And then Michigan itself, I'm a board member on the Michigan Council of Women in Technology. And what we are trying to do is make Michigan be the #1 place for women in tech. So we do all different kind of programs for K through 12. We do college student mentoring. We have a scholarship program. We have a kind of re-entering your career, maybe up in the tech field. We have early career development, mid-career, and executive development.
My wife is experiencing that right now. She just took her first job in forever earlier this year. So it's been a learning curve. It's been really interesting because I'm like, no, of course you don't do that. And, because I don't realize how
Right.
how much I've had from my 25 years of experience.
Yeah, it's normal, but when you're first coming back into
Right.
the workforce like that, there's all those little things you need to learn.
Right, and how much the social change has been
Yeah.
as well. And so that's cool. So what, have you launched any programs yet? Or is
Yeah, this has been an organization that's been around. I think this is our 24th year.
Oh, wow, okay, wow.
I've been
Yeah, that's
involved
cool.
for 10 years, and this is my first year in a leadership position
Uh-huh.
for it. I'm just, certainly I have 2 daughters and a son, and, all 3 are going to be engineers.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So it's a passion that I have to show that this is a very lucrative
Right.
and rewarding career path that often girls are disheartened to pay attention to.
Right.
So I'd love to be part of that community to help foster that and grow and develop. And I mentor a ton of people, whoever asks me, because there's so few women in leadership
Right.
in tech companies and tech positions. So anytime someone asks me,
Yeah.
could you be my mentor? Absolutely. I want to give them a role model to show that you can do this. Like
Right.
persevere through the stumbling that you have as you're kind of learning things. And
So whenever conversations like this come up, I bring this up a lot, but there was an article in Cosmopolitan magazine in 1979 about why women should become programmers, and how it was just like running a dinner party. And I think it's so interesting, right? Because in a lot of ways, it's 100% right on, right? It's like you basically have to give, when you want to be a programmer, it means you give very detailed instructions, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to think about all the little details, like you got to make sure you seat this person next to that person, but not that other person, because they don't like each other, right? Or they used to date, right? Or something, but then you also have to plan all the recipes and figure out, make sure the timing is right, and it was such a great article, and and the fact that it was in Cosmopolitan magazine, right, is also particularly interesting, and then what happened, right? So I definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
I kind of say, part of the reason I joined Boston University is to try to make it so that less people who look like me are in my field, or there's more people who don't look like me in my field.
Yeah, it's hard to be the only one in a room.
Yeah.
Right, and that's been the majority of my career. There's, I remember being on a team, there was 6 women and 84 men.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
so we created our little women's group so we could talk and things like that.
Right.
So it's hard to be in that situation. But Ford's been great. They've been a great company to work for, and I've always felt respected and
That's
able
cool.
to
That's good.
make advancements when I needed to.
Yeah, I remember we were at a company, it was like 30 or 40 people. So it was big, but it had very, very few women. But we had inordinately large bathrooms. And I became really good friends with one of the women. And she was like, yeah, we all kind of had this collective angry moment where we hired such and such, and that meant we didn't all have our individual stalls anymore. And I was like, oh, that's such a weird experience.
That's so funny that there were so few that they each had their own stall.
Right.
That's interesting.
But it was an inordinately large bathroom,
Yeah.
so it was a little bit better. But yeah, it was not a great ratio.
Yeah.
We had the added difficulty of it was also consulting, and so at least in my experience, there tends to be less women in consulting because it's also, insanity.
Yeah, there's a lot of travel involved. I know my husband has been a road warrior for the last few
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
And I'm so grateful he was more technical when my kids were young and around, so he was home for all of the things. And now that they're grown and flown, he's able to travel. And
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
My wife actually really appreciated when because I used to travel as a consultant, I was mostly a fixer. So it'd be like on Monday, I found out when I was supposed to be on Tuesday. But I'd only be gone for like maybe 2 or 3 days. So in some ways, I didn't travel that much. Like I wasn't like on the road all the time. But what she really liked was I switched to being like more like developer advocacy. I had a well-planned, and I'd be gone for like a week or a week and a half. And so they could have a new schedule, right? Rather than me just kind of, disappearing and then being back again. So that was always, it was a really interesting moment for me.
Yeah.
On the flip side, she, we often joke that she married a consultant, and so periodically she's like, "Don't you have like a conference or something to go to? Like, could you go away for a bit?"
I've had that conversation too.
Yeah.
I've had that conversation too. Like, we need a little time apart. When are you traveling again?
Right. It's funny too because my parents, have spent a significant amount of their time while they've been married like apart, because they both work in academia. And so, and basically you go where the job is, right? And so, they were bouncing around a little bit. And yeah, I can't believe how much I feel like it in my head, right? It's like normal because it was my parents.
Right.
But then I kind of look at it from like the outside and I'm like, oh no, that's really not
unique.
normal. That's really unusual.
Yeah, that is very unique.
That's
very unique.
So want me to turn left again? I missed my turn, so I'm now negotiating with the GPS about what to do next. Yeah. So
we have orange barrel season, and then we have winter.
Yeah, it's funny. In Boston, we call it construction season in winter.
Yeah.
But I like one of the other locals with the video crew was saying it's the state flower of Michigan. It's the orange barrel. I was like, that is awesome.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's so funny. But you want to have good roads for we don't have mass transit, right? We're the auto.
Yeah. Although I did drive the people mover.
Oh yeah.
So that was fun.
Yeah.
Because like when I first saw it, because there's just a sign in the hotel that says people mover this way, and I like asked one of the employees, I was like, so where and what is a people mover? And then she goes back to me. She goes, well, it's this thing that moves people. And I'm like, thanks. I suppose I deserve that. But it was hilarious. But I did finally manage to take it.
It's kind of like the Disney monorail. So you
yeah.
feel like you're going to the Magic Kingdom, and then you get there and you're like, oh, what? Where's the castle?
Right. Yeah, my dad used to work at Disney, and so I've actually been on the Disney monorail a number of times.
Oh, fun.
Because when my dad had to work and my brother and I would spend summers with him, he would just drop us off at Disney for like the day. We would just wander around Disney and go to like all the rides.
Sounds like a pretty awesome childhood.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And it's funny. It's like my wife always wants to take our kids to Disney. I'm like, why would we go there? It's so boring.
Yeah.
I'm a little jaded.
Yeah, you've been there too much.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but it was pretty cool.
That's cool.
So we're just about time. You want to kind of wrap it up? And
Yeah, so I just want to encourage, if you're listening today, to recognize that Ford has a lot to offer for people who want to move in their technical advancements and their skills. We invest in our people, and we have a lot of very interesting jobs posted on careers.ford.com.
Hint,
so check it out.
Yeah.
And follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn. I might be able to put you in touch with the people who have the skills that you're interested in.
Well, and I think it's interesting to point out, right? Like Ford, like many other manufacturing companies, et cetera, like you're doing a ridiculous amount of software. I don't think it occurs to people like how much software that goes into both the creation of a car, right? But then on top of it, actually making this car go, right? And in some ways, it's really interesting software because it's unusual,
right?
And so I definitely would think it'd be a lot of fun to work on a nav system. You know? Well, thanks so much again for coming. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again at the panel in a few hours.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.